So we're going in. All right. What is evil? Can a person be evil? Did you just tell me to stop? Sorry about that. If so, if a person can be evil. If so, how does a person become evil? Are evil people liars, backbiters, gossipers, murderers, Trinitarians, Oneness Pentecostals, King James only Bible thumpers? Do evil people believe you can lose your salvation? Do evil people believe once saved, always saved? Do evil people believe that we are saved by works and not grace? Do evil people believe that we are saved by grace only? Do evil people believe that the Bible isn't inspired? Do evil people think that the original letters were inspired? Are evil people simply those who disagree with our theology? I said all that way and ask it this way because so often, or more often than not, it seems to me that that's what the religious see as evil. Are Judaism and Christianity religions of tolerance, or are they discriminatory? And if they are discriminatory, should they be? Should Jews and Christians find a way to harmonize their beliefs with those of other religions? Should Jews and Christians hang on to what they believe no matter what anyone else says? The name of this message is Not in My House. All right, please stand and cover yourselves for the reading of the scriptures. For those of you who don't know, I'm tethered. I can't stand. It's not a law, though. It's not. The Torah doesn't teach us that we have to do that. It's a tradition, and it's a tradition that was held by most all of the Jews of the Bible, of the part that the Christians call the Old Testament, but it's also held by everybody in what they call the New Testament. Yeshua, the man they call Jesus, he did this. All of his Talmudim, all of his disciples, they did this, and everyone who followed them did this. I know that there's a place in the New Testament English translation that says that they didn't, but that's a very bad translation. And you'll find that most of the translations actually say they did. It's just one or two that say otherwise. So our verse today, well, one of them, is Yeshayahu, that's known as Isaiah, chapter 57, verse 20. And in Hebrew it says, V'ha reshamim kayam nigrash ki hashket lo yuhol va'yireshu memav refesh va'tit. And then our next verse is from Yeshayahu. It's verse 21, 57, 21. So we're doing verses 20 and 21 from chapter 57. It says, Ein Shalom, Amar Elohai La Sha'im. All right, you may be seated. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through the individual words of Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 57, verse 20. I'm not going to go through those. Instead, I'm just going to read you the translation. So verse 20 says, But the wicked are like a troubled sea when it cannot rest. So a sea can be troubled apparently and rest. Just say it. The wicked are like a troubled sea when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. Now, let's take a look at the Hebrew text of 57:21, the next verse. Our first word is ain. Ain is not so much the word no as it is emptiness. It's a vacuity. Something is missing. And then shalom is our next word. So shalom is missing. And shalom is what we think of as peace, but it's so much more than that. It's to be whole. It's to be complete of body, to be healthy in the body, to be healthy in the mind. You could actually be unhealthy in the body, but healthy in the mind, and you could say that your mind has shalom, right? because the mind is sound, it's secure, it's tranquil. So it's of wholeness. I start to say holiness, but it's not. It's of wholeness. I'm still trying to say that. Wholeness, it's safety, it's soundness. It is used to encourage one which is fearful, to bring them peace, right? And to assure that person who's fearful of peace. It's to reassure somebody in the sense that there's nothing for that person to be afraid of because you are safe. It's from the root, shalom is from the root, shalom, which is where we get the word Salem, because in Greek, there was no SH sound, there was only an S, and that's where the H gets lost. So it goes from shalom to Salem. Salem, you get it? It was a long way around the horn, but it's where we get the word Salem. Anyway, so it's the root of shalom, and it's to be whole, of course, sound, safe, to be completed or finished, to have peace, friendship with anyone. But the thing that gets lost in the translations once we got into the English, and particularly after the Dark Ages, coming out of the Dark Ages, and you get into the time of the 1800s, it begins to lose its original meaning and feeling and begins to become more abstract in its meaning and feeling. Because shalom was only said of those who were in right standing with God. Real shalom came that way. Shalom comes from knowing the Torah and knowing what the laws are, knowing how to apply those laws in our hearts and in our minds and living by that. And so when something bad happens, we don't lose our peace. You know, the government goes out of control and, you know, we go from being a free country to having a dictator or whatever. We can still have peace in those, because think what the turmoil would be like if Obama decided, oh, we're not going to have an election in November. I've just decided to be your emperor, and somehow the government said, yeah, we're behind that. We'll back him up on that. I mean, there would be some real turmoil, right? But if we know that who we are and what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to live, regardless of what's going on among the corrupt, we don't lose our peace, right? That's real shalom. One of the best explanations I ever heard came from a Christian, actually, a Christian pastor. He witnessed a wreck. It happened right in front of him. There was a young girl in the car. She was pinned in the car and couldn't get out. She, I'm sorry, I just lost my voice there. She was pinned in the car. She was not hurt badly, but she was terrified, obviously. And so he walked up to her and he talked to her and he calmed her down and kept her calm and kept her soothed until the jaws of life thing, you could cut her out of her, because she literally had to be cut out of her car. So then he gets in his car and he's thinking to himself, now, that was shalom, that was peace. And he heard, you know, that little voice in his head say, no, if you'd been able to act like that and that'd been your daughter in that car, that would have been peace. And I thought, that was a good insight. It really was, because it's easy to have that peace when it's somebody we don't know. But what if it's your baby girl? Now we'll know whether you have peace or not. And that's what shalom is about. And it comes about by knowing who you are and where you stand with God, and knowing that you're doing what's right and you've done what's right. And regardless of what happens, that bad government comes along and they take your house from you and they take your money from you and maybe they throw you in jail, you can still be at peace at your heart because you know you're right with God. And regardless of even if they kill you, you know where you're going to go. You know that you've done everything right. I know that I got to a place when I was going through interviews looking for jobs and stuff like that. My main goal was to come out of that knowing that I had done my very best. Whether, you know, because there were times when I went thinking there's no way I could ever get this job. But for whatever reason, they called me. So I would go in and just gave it my best shot. And then sometimes I would get there thinking, man, I am the guy for this job. I am the guy they're looking for. And then you get there and realize that the hiring manager has sold himself as having more knowledge than he really does. And he knows that if he hires me, he's going to be exposed. So, you know, the moment you get there and realize that, you know you're not getting this job. But still, no matter what. I wanted to come away from that knowing that I had done the right thing, that I had given it my absolute best shot, so that I didn't have to look back later on and say, man, if I just would have spoken more succinctly, if I would have spoken more clearly, if I would have done a better job, if I would have smiled more, if my handshake would have been more. I didn't want to have that kind of thing go through my head. So I gave it my best shot every time. And that's the thing about living out the Torah. You may not know every law, but the ones you know, you do them to the best of your ability. And that gives you peace because you know that God's only requiring that you go and learn the law and you learn to apply it as you learn it. You're not responsible for the stuff that you haven't learned. But you do also know that you have to show up. You have to get that education. That falls on your shoulders. So as long as you show up, as long as you do what's required of you and learn, because you're not going to learn if you don't show up. So you show up, you learn it, you apply it to the best of your ability. Next year, you're going to realize that you fell short. That's fine. We all fall short. So then you tweak what you knew from last year and what you've learned this year. And then the next year, you realize, oop, I forgot about that little piece there. So then you add that to it. And as time goes on, we get to the place where one day we get through one year we get through a pass sock and realize, oh, I did everything right. Woohoo! Because that's the goal. That's what you're trying to accomplish. And that brings joy, it brings peace, and you know that you've done everything that you can do. And so the government comes out and they say you can't celebrate Pesach anymore. So you find ways to celebrate it. What the hell would I know about it? That's what the Jews have always had to do it. Well, not always, but at times in history, they had to find ways to celebrate uh, their feasts. Maybe they couldn't get lamb. So, well, if you can't get lamb, you can't get lamb. I mean, the rule is you're supposed to eat lamb, but if you can't get it because the government won't let you have it for fear that you're being Jewish, that's happened. Well, that's probably where the shank bone came in the first place. We'll represent our lamb with a shank bone. It's, I think, been perverted since then into now you have to have the shank bone, and that's what God intended from the beginning. No, it's not. You're supposed to have a lamb. But things happen. And they found ways to work around it. They're supposed to wear a fringe. Government wouldn't allow them to wear the fringe. So they wore the fringe underneath the clothing. Government wasn't looking, so they got away with it. They found ways to do what they knew was right. And there are times when the king builds himself a big monument to himself and says everybody's going to bow down and put their head to the ground and say, "Oh, wonderful king," and you have to stand up and say, "No, our God is able to save us from that fire, but if he doesn't, because he didn't give us a guarantee he would. We know he can, but he didn't guarantee he would. We know that he can, but if he doesn't, we're still not going to break God's law." I mean, there are times when it comes down to it, sometimes that's what we have to do. But if there's a way that we can make it happen, then we make it happen. There was no way to get around that. There was no way, because you can't pretend that you're not bowing before an idol when you're bowed before an idol. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there are some things you just can't get around, and you're just going to have to stand up. That's when we stand up against the authority that's above us, when there's just no other way. Because, the Jews could have said, God told us to wear a fringe, and it's supposed to be on the outer garment. We're going to wear it whether it kills us or not. I think that would be more honorable. Had the Jews done that, I think that would have been more honorable. And honestly, I think it's the right thing to do. But they didn't. They wore it under their clothing. And so now there are people that actually think that if you wear it, if you don't wear it under your clothing, you're going to hell. Torah observance is supposed to be simple, not complex. There's only one issue in the Bible that's a heaven and hell issue. Just one. Just one. Nothing else is heaven and hell. Nothing else. It's about being pure before the face of God. It's about living a life that will bring us peace in the worst of situations. All right, so our next word is amar, which it's in our case it's like said or says. It's to say, but the primary signification is to bear forth, hence to bring light. It is to say. In short, it's to shed light on a subject. Somebody says, well, you keep saying thus and so. What do you mean by that? And so then you explain it. That's amar. It's not just to talk, it's to explain something, it's to make someone understand something. I'm doing amar right now. It's more than just to say something. It's to shed light on it, it's to make someone understand it. That's what they mean by shedding light on it. It's to make it understood. Because, you turn the light on and what do you say? Ah, now I can see. All right, so the next word is Elohai. And Elohai is my God. It's literally God my. But we would say my God. And it's a generic word. It is not the name for God. You do not have to capitalize it. There is no capitalization in Hebrew in the first place. The capitalization thing is a Western thing, not a biblical thing. It is Elohai is, if Buddha is your God, you would call him Elohai. It's just like our word in English, God. It's generic. We use it of the real God, and we use it of all the fake gods, right? Because it's a generic word for God. And Elohai is the Hebrew generic word for that. That's followed by Larashaim, which is the wickeds. Wickeds. I realize it's not a word, but it's wicked in plural. What would that be other than wickeds? I don't know. That's all I could come up with is wickeds. It's of wickedness. It's of unrighteousness. That should tell us something. What is righteousness? It's Torah observance. Unrighteousness, therefore, is non-Torah observance. So wickedness is non-Torah observance. It's having an unrighteous cause. Everything according to the Torah is going to be a righteous cause. It's going to be a right and just cause. So this is the opposite of that. And it's to be guilty. What you're doing will bring guilt to yourself. It makes you liable to punishment. So I don't see, like we've been talking earlier about the being unclean by going to a funeral. I don't see that us being unclean for 7 days is a punishment. That's a purification process, right? But let's say we withhold the truth in a legal matter, and somebody gets blamed for something that they weren't guilty of, or somebody winds up having to pay a big fine for something again that they weren't guilty of, and your silence basically caused that, because had you said something, had you let on the truth that you knew the thing that you knew to be true, that person would have been shown not to be liable, right? That's where you get punished. The things that you do that cause harm to others are the things that you do that are that you do in direct violation. Mockery of God is one of the things that you will be punished for, because you assume guilt onto yourself. There are things that you do that you are punished for. God does punish those whom he loves. That's in a book I've read somewhere. I'm just saying, this word, our word was what? Lerashaim. It is from the root rasha. It's to make a noise, a tumult, a commotion, a disturbance. Hence to be unrighteous, wicked, to have an unrighteous cause, to be guilty. So we kind of get the idea it's all about Torah observance. It is the same as, according to Gesenius, ra'ah, to make a loud noise. It sounds the same, right? The special sense of breaking and crushing, the sense of trembling, which arises from being struck. And I think a good example of that is you watch the old Rocky movies, and when he punched somebody, well, generally it's when they punched him, and they would do it in super slow motion. You'd see his face just ripple, right? Because that's what happens when you get punched. This is exactly what they're talking about. That loud noise, like what you hear in the movies. Punches are not really that loud. Your punch does not sound like that. Just ask someone to punch you in the mouth, and so if you really want to know what it sounds like. I'm just saying. It's, I mean, the sound they use is, it's got reverb added to it, and delay and distortion and all that to make it more exciting for the movie. That's nonsensical. But there is a noise from it, and it's usually the screaming and the carrying on from the person hitting you and from being struck and saying, yeah! There's where the loud noise is coming from. It's not from the loud punch. It's a sense of trembling. That's the rippling of the face, the trembling, which arises from being struck, especially to break, to be broken, like the snapping of bones. Which, if you've ever heard someone's bones break, that is the most sound, especially when it's your own bone. Nasty sound. To break the broken is to be evil. It's from the idea of raging. So, the raging of someone screaming, you no good, worthless piece of, like what I used to get as a kid. It's referred to an evil disposition. They're basically, what they're talking about is the distortion of a face, the rage. When someone's in a rage, the distortion of their face, and the screaming and the noise and the sound of punching and breaking. That's what they call evil. It's opposite. This word ra'ah is the opposite to zadik, which is just, righteous, which is of course Torah observance, used of a judge or a king who maintains the right and dispenses justice. So when a judge makes a ruling that he knows is wrong, which happens all the time, by the way, all the time, it is as if he distorted his face in rage and anger and punched and broke someone's jaw. That's what being a bad judge is in the Bible. One who maintains the right. So this word is the opposite of one who maintains the right, one who dispenses justice. It's very often this word, Zadik, is used of God as being the just judge, because God would never distort his face in rage and anger. He's never done it. We actually went through a verse where God said he had never done that. I don't remember where that was. It's a wonderful Bible study. Both in punishing, so God gives the just judgment both in punishing, because sometimes you're guilty and the judge has to give you punishment. So yeah, a just judge gives punishment. And in a rewarding, so if you've been shown to be right in a cause, this guy really does owe you money, the judge awards you that money, right? So that's what they're saying by the punishing and rewarding. One who has a just cause, one who speaks what is right and true. So again, they're talking about Torah observance. So the raging and the anger and all of that, non-Torah observance is compared to that. The grammar rule behind this word that the zadik, is when spoken of an individual is one who is just toward other men, one who is obedient to the laws of God, and hence honest, virtuous, and pious. So you may question, so what are people like who are not obedient to the law of God? And your answer is, they are ra'ah, they are evil. So here's our translation of Yeshayahu, Isaiah 57:21. Yahweh brought it to light with these words: there is no wholeness, soundness, security, tranquility, safety, completeness, or friendship to the wicked. There isn't any. No wholeness, no soundness, no tranquility, no safety, no completeness, no friendship to the wicked. Now let's compare that to something in the Sepharim Shelahim, in what they call the New Testament. In 2 Yohanan, that's 2 John, chapter 1, verse 10, it says, this is my translation of the Greek text. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not let him in. Do not receive him in your house. Your house. If anyone teaches a doctrine other than the doctrine that was taught by the followers of Yeshua, don't let them in your house. And do not extend to him a greeting. It says do not extend to him Godspeed in most Bibles. What? That's shalom. But literally, the word is the word for shalom. While this verse can be taken literal, remember, first century Hebrew was an idiomatic language. Don't let people with other beliefs into your house, the place where you live, your mind, your heart. You got to think idiomatically. So, should you let them into your house, your physical house? No. That's the literal version of it. But what you need to know, because it's idiomatic, is your house this is your temple. This is your house. This is where you live. Your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings. You don't let them in here. Now let's go through the individual words of 2nd Yohanan, 2nd John 1:11. We begin with didaxane. Ever heard of the didache? It's people mispronouncing this word. Didaxane is how you say it, and it means doctrine. It's used in place of the Hebrew word lamad, my favorite Hebrew word, by the way. Of course, all Hebrew words are my favorite. To chastise, to strike, to beat with a rod, especially beast of burden. Hence, to discipline, to train, to used of recruits of war, people who are trained in war. This word is NPL. It, in this case, would be used in PL, and it's to train, to accustom somebody to something. That's why you train them. To teach anyone something. I talked about this, I believe, last week, but I'll bring it back up again. The idea of lamad, you got to think of the stick, the lamed. It's a long stick. It has a crook in it, and then goes down. It's the shepherd's rod. And they got one with the crook so they could literally get the neck of the sheep. It really was, so they could get it when it got off on a ledge or something or in a bush, and they had to pull him out. That was their only way to do it. So they would use it that way. But they used the end of it, the straighter end that actually made contact with the ground. They would look at a lamed. It actually looks like kind of like the stick they used, but they used that end of it. It would be about yay long, just a long stick at that point, to pop an animal on the backside. You know, you're going to this place, and every day you're going to this place. Think of cattle. Every morning you feed your cattle in the same place. You ought to. And maybe they have to go through a chute or something and take a right and go over to this area where you can feed them. And then afterwards you're going to run them out the other direction and put them into the other side of the field. That's the way we did it when I was a kid. I don't know why. It was just what mom and dad did, told me to do. That's what we did. So you would have to take that stick and pop them on the backside, and generally you pop them on the opposite side that you wanted them to turn, because it always made them turn their body in one way or the other. So you had to learn to pop them on the opposite. If you wanted them to turn to the right, you pop them in the left. If you want to turn to the left, pop them on the right. So you learn that, but you do that. Well, now, the third or fourth time you do that with most cattle, you'll never have to do that again. They'll just get it. You've trained them. Some, oh, good Lord, that's what the electric one was for. Very negative reinforcement. Some were just that way. Some you couldn't train no matter what you did. Most of them you could. Most of them 2 or 3 days of doing it and they were good. Some of them it would take 2 or 3 weeks. Some of them, like I said, every once in a while you got one that you couldn't teach anything. Kind of like our little chihuahua. But the idea is that it's repetitive. It's not about hurting the animal, because you never hit an animal hard enough to hurt it. Even when you shocked it with the little shocker thing, you weren't actually, you're thinking about this. You're going through a lot of leather before it hits a nerve, right? And us kids, believe it or not, used to go around shocking each other with that thing. We thought it was very funny. And it was a little bit of a joke. I'll give you that. You wouldn't want that very many times in a row. But so what I'm trying to say is the idea is not to hurt the animal. Sometimes you have to use the more juice because the animal just will not respond to you. And if you've got one that's in the chute and won't go any further, and you got 40 of them behind it all mooing because they want to eat, You got to get the thing to go. Either get it out of the way, one of the two. So, that's why you did that. But anyway, the idea is not in the hurting the animal, it's in the repetition. If I do it today, and then I do it tomorrow, and then I do it the next day, maybe I have to do it for a week, maybe I have to do it for 2, maybe I have to do the repetition. At some point, they get it through repetition. That's actually what the Lamed is about. So doctrine comes through repetition. It does not come through reading it once and, oh yeah, I got it. I'm sorry. Doctrine comes through repetition. It comes through being trained through repetition. And that's the idea. You've always got to think about the repetition. The next word is lambanete, which I know I'm really butchering that Greek word, but I don't care. It's to receive. It's used in place of the Hebrew word nasa, which is to take up, to lift up. They used it, the waters came in and it lifted up the boat. Speaking of Noah, the water, think about it. The boat didn't lift up on its own. The water came in and the water lifted that boat up. So it's of lifting up. There's an example they give in Bereshit, or Genesis, as we know it, 7:17. The waters increased and bore up the ark. To lift up one's head, lift it up, right? Used of one who is cheerful and merry. To lift up the head of anyone from prison was to pull them out of that hole in the ground that they were in. Because in the Bible time, and especially the ancient Bible time, prison was a dried up cistern or a dried up well, just big enough to drop a human body into. And then they put a big stone over the top of it. You were in some serious darkness. So to lift up one's head from prison was to move the stone out and pull them out of that hole. To bear, to carry as an infant, to bear someone's sins. Because something that could happen, let's say you get convicted in the Bible days of you owed some guy 35 cents and you just couldn't come up with 35 cents, because believe me, back then that would have been a lot of money. But so you owe him 35 cents, you can't have the money. Okay, well, you're going to stay in that hole for 2 days for that. I can't imagine that being, well, like I said, 35 cents was a lot of money, so maybe you get 2 days for that. Well, a redeemer could come by and say, well, this is my favorite nephew, here's 35 cents. He's paid your price, you don't have to go to jail. Or let's say they feel your dad comes along and he's old and he's broken down and this is planting season. Maybe he pays the 35 cents and you go to the field and work the fields while he's in the home. That's why they let people do that. It was a merciful way to do things. But so it was to bear anyone's sin. That's what they meant by that. Yeshua dying on the cross, that was how he paid the price, our price, right? Bore our punishment on his own body. So, yeah, so when you think about the holding a child in the arm, taking something onto yourself in place of somebody else, in light of this sentence, it's don't take and run with it. Somebody's giving you bad didache, bad doctrine, bad lamed. Don't take it and run with it. Don't take a hold of it. Don't join yourself to it. Don't lift it up and bear it on your shoulders, right? That's the kind of thing they're saying here. And then, of course, the next word is oikion in Greek, which is bait in Hebrew. It's house. But to pass the night, the place where you sleep. It's of movable houses, of tents. It's of a royal house, a palace, a fortress. They use this word for all of that. The house of God was the temple, right? Dwelling or abode, it's a habitation, it's a home, a place where a family lives and loves and grows. So what are his evil deeds? Well, it would be teaching something other than what the apostles taught, right? And you can't take that into your heart. You can't take that into your mind. You can't take that into your house, your temple, right? The temple of God, the house of God is the temple. The house of you is your temple. So you need to keep that in mind because it's an idiomatic language. The next Greek word is o, means for or because. Then it says lagon in Greek. It's bid or bids. It's actually in plural. It's sha'al in Hebrew. It's to ask, to demand, to ask anyone anything, uh, to request anything from someone. Specifically, it's to ask for a loan, to borrow from anyone, to inquire of someone, to interrogate someone, to question them, in other words. Specifically, it is to consult, to ask anyone, ask after somebody's health. How are you? How are you doing? How's your father doing? How's your mother doing? Hence, they call it a salute. You know, people didn't walk around and say, you know, they didn't do stuff like that. To salute was to say, how are you? How are you doing? That's what they call the salute in the Bible. In Bereshit, or Genesis 43:27, it says, and he asked them of their welfare and said, is your father well? He just saluted. The old man of whom he spake, is he yet alive? Is he alive? How is your father? Is he well? Is he alive? Salute. Then our next word is gar, which is another word for, because, that kind of a thing. It's key in Hebrew. Then alto, which is him. It's also used for the word it. So it's either him, he, or it. All right, so then we have hairein. Our next word is hairein in Greek. And this does not mean Godspeed. Hairein is used for the word shalom. Now, I've already said this, right? That having the peace based on knowing who you are and where you stand and what's expected of you from God and what you can expect from God. It brings absolute peace in the craziest situations. You know, some people, when Hitler did his thing, there were Jews, and I do believe most of them, when they knew at that moment that they were about to be killed in a gas chamber, uh, you know, the women and their children would start crying and be terrified and all of that, and the mothers who maybe could have lived because they were healthy and could have gone into a work camp, the mothers would sometimes give up their chance to live and take their child by the hand and get in line with their child to go die, to comfort that child all the way to the end. That's a peace that passes all understanding. You know you're going to die, but you're going to comfort your child all the way to the end. I believe I would do that, but you never know until you get in that situation. But hundreds, if not thousands, of women did that for their children. They had real shalom. The world had blown up and gotten all kinds of crazy, and nothing made sense anymore. The Jews were being murdered just because they were Jewish, nothing else. They didn't even have to be observant Jews. If you were born into a Jewish family, you had the mark of death written right on your front door. It said Yehudi. Yeah, it actually said Yehudi. But they had peace. Then our next word is koinone. Sounds like koine. It's not the same thing though. It's partaker. It's used in place of the Hebrew word havar. To bind together, hence to join together, but almost always used intransitively, without a direct object is what that means. To be joined together, to adhere. It's like gluing something together. In Hebrew, this would be used in pual, which is to join together, to be associated with, to have fellowship with. Do not have fellowship with. They give an example in Tehillim, or Psalm 122:3. It says, as a city which is joined together, in other words, the ruins of which the stones long thrown down and scattered are again built together. So in other words, somebody went in and they destroyed the city, and then somebody else comes in and picks up the stones and builds a new city right on the top of the rubble. So the old city and the new city are literally joined together. Our next word is tois. In Greek, it means is. There is no use of that word. Well, sort of there is. If you put the ke sound, no, that's really more as or also. Nah, there's really no use of the is in Hebrew. Forget it. Then we go to ergois, which is the word for deeds. And of course, in Hebrew, we know that's ma'aseh, ma'asah, that which anyone makes or does, a deed in action, work, which anyone produces. It's used of God, the things which he made with his hands. So the deeds of God are everything from creating the universe, the light, separating the light from the darkness, creating, separating the ground from the waters, creating the animals and the fish and the birds. All of that are the deeds of God. But what most people in the Western world do not know is that the Torah is God's lifestyle. So God does the deeds. If God does have a neighbor, which I don't think he does, but if he does, if that neighbor's ox falls off in a ditch, God will help him. Get that ditch out of the ox. Get that ditch out of the ox. Get that ox out of the ditch. God lives by the Torah. He does not commit adultery. He does not commit murder. He does not worship other idols. He doesn't, you know what I'm saying? God lives by the Torah. It is his lifestyle. Those are the ma'aseh. Those are the deeds of God. Of men, it's the works of men, the works of their hand. Metaphorically, the fruit of anything, what is produced by labor, property, goods. So what are your deeds? Are your deeds the deeds of Torah, or are they the deeds of evil? It's pretty simple, right? And this word, of course, ma'asah, it's from the root asa, which is to labor, to work about anything, to make, to produce, to labor, to manufacture, to fabricate, used of God to produce, to create the heavens and the earth, to make anything, to produce it from himself, blah, blah, blah. Sounds a lot like the way the word was used, right? They give an example in Tehillim, that's Psalm 92:4. For you, Yahweh, have made me glad through your work. Wow. I will triumph in the works of your hands. It's the word work, the ma'asah, it's from the 64, 67, if you're looking at the Strongs, a deed, an act of men, especially an illustrious deed or an evil deed, is whatever your deed is. And we know that God's deeds are righteous deeds, they're Torah observant deeds. So here's another way of saying it. Because you, Yahweh, have made me glad through the things you created, I will triumph in the works of your hands. Our next word in the Greek is autau, which is his or it. Remember, his and it are the same word. Then they have the word ponero is. It's from ponero, or as we know it in English, porno. Literally, that's where you get the word porno. It's translated as evil, and it's used in place of the word ra. I think it's interesting that the Hebrew word for evil is the name of the main Egyptian god. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that was on purpose. But it's the evil, the bad, the wicked. It's of a manner of thinking and acting. It's hurtful things, evil in appearance, the distorting of the face. Deform, that's what they mean by deform. It's the distorting of the face. Evil, especially in an ethical sense. It's from the root ra'ah. There's our word. To make the loud noise, the sense of breaking and the crushing. We've already had the word, right? So here's our amplified translation of 2 Yochanan 1:11. 2 John 1:11. Because he that asks anything, inquires, consults with, borrows or bids him peace, binds, adheres, and joins himself to his, that's the other person's, evil deeds. Here's the regular translation. For he that extends to him a greeting shares in his evil deeds. That's pretty clear, I think. We become a part of it. and it becomes a part of us. We have adhered to it. We've been glued to it. In other words, the person who allows someone in their abode who teaches anything other than that of the apostles is, in fact, reassuring himself and the false teacher that the false teacher's beliefs have merit. So he's telling you right here in this verse that people who teach anything other than the apostles, what they're teaching has no merit of any kind whatsoever. Doesn't matter that they have this little bitty piece of the truth, and that group has this little bitty piece of the truth, and that group has this little bitty piece. It doesn't matter. Their teaching has no merit whatsoever. And when you allow them into your abode, you are affirming. That's a good word. You are affirming to that person that you believe what they believe has merit. That's why you become guilty of it. It seems simple enough. Just reject anyone who teaches something other than what the apostles taught, and we'll all be just fine. Let me tell you, one day, the first time I came across this verse and had translated it, worked my way through it, and understood it. No, I am not kidding you. I had just finished the translation, and there's a knock on my front door. Click, click, click. Open it up. Here's his two boys in white shirts and a little tie. Good afternoon, sir. Clunk. I shut the door and left them standing on my front porch. And they stood there for a while. They did not know what to do. But they finally walked away. Well, that's what you're supposed to do. But how can we know who these people are? I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? Well, I don't know, Rob. How did you know? As I laid out in this message, or not in this message, but in my message called By Any Other Gospel, the church does not now, nor has it ever taught the same thing the apostles did. If you have trouble with that, go watch the message called By Any Other Gospel. I lay it out. You'll see why I say it. The church does not now, nor has it ever taught the same thing the apostles taught. It's never happened. Some churches teach that there are three gods. The apostles taught that there is only one. The church, and I hear them yelling, "Oh, they're three in one." No, the apostles never taught any such thing. There was no Trinity in their lifetime. There was no Holy Ghost over here floating around, possessing people's bodies and wagging their tongues and shaking their booty and putting information in their head. Didn't exist in their lifetime. There was no Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. That did not exist while the apostles were alive. They didn't teach it. So what should you know? There is no merit. You cannot glue yourself to it. The apostles taught there's only one God. The church teaches that there is a Father, a Son, a Holy Spirit, who are all separate and completely distinct individuals, but live in harmony and therefore are one. That teaching did not exist during the lifetime of any of the apostles. Some teach that there is only one God and his name is Jesus. The apostles never knew a man named Jesus. The J, the sound associated with it, didn't even exist until the it wasn't even that early. It's about 400 years ago that the J, let me think about this a second. I'll give it 600 years. At the most, 600 years ago, they invented the J, and the sound that we now know came along actually later, not at the time. I do not believe the J had the J sound when it first came along. When it first came along, it had the Y sound. It morphed about 400 years ago to the J sound. That I'll stand by. So they didn't know anybody named Jesus. They knew a man named Yeshua. Very different than Jesus. Some teach that women should be silent in the church and should never have a position of leadership. But there were female rabbis, and leaders of the synagogues mentioned in the Greek text of the New Testament letters, whose names were changed to men's names. In my translation, I gave them back their female names. Some teach that there will be a rapture and millions of people will disappear suddenly without warning, causing massive car wrecks and planes to fall out of the sky. The apostles taught that it wasn't possible for God to be the source of confusion or chaos. So you have a problem, don't you? Some teach that the Old Testament passed away and the New Testament took its place. The apostles taught that Yeshua was the new sacrifice that took place of the old sacrifice, not testaments. Some teach that God became fed up with the Jews, kicked them out of his life, and replaced them with the Christians. Yeshua said that he came only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He didn't come for the Gentiles. In short, non-Jewish religions have a tendency toward choosing to believe that which they wish to be true. Do the Muslims, Jews, and Christians all worship the same God? No. No, they do not. I don't care what CNN tells you. I don't care what ABC, CBS, or NBC tells you. Muslims, Jews, and Christians do not worship the same God. Do the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, Gnostics, and Christians all serve the same God? They all talk about Jesus. Again, no, they do not serve the same God. Basically, everyone has their own unique God. Here's basic Mormon beliefs, and I took it from their works, Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry. Here's something it said, and I quote, God himself was once as we are now, and is an exalted man, and sits enthroned in yonder heavens. We have imagined that God was God from all eternity. I will refute that idea and take away the veil so that you may see. That came from Teachings of the Prophets, Joseph Smith, page 345. Another quote, the Father has a body of flesh and bones as tangible as man's. From Doctrine and Covenants, 130:22, and it's compared with Alma 18:26 through 27 and 22:9 through 10. Another quote, therefore we know that both the Father and the Son are in form and stature perfect men. Each of them possesses a tangible body of flesh and bones. Articles of Faith by James Talmage, page 38. Another, the Trinity is three separate gods, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That these three are separate individuals, physically distinct from each other, is demonstrated by the accepted record of divine dealings with men. That comes from Articles of Faith by James Talmage, page 35. Here's another one. The birth of the Savior was as natural as are the births of our children. It was the result of natural action. He's saying that there was sex. He partook of flesh and blood, was begotten of his Father. In other words, God had sex with Mary, as we were of our fathers. Journal Discourses, Volume 8, page 115. Here's another one. Christ was begotten by an immortal Father in the same way that mortal men are begotten by mortal fathers. That's Mormon Doctrine by Bruce McConkie, page 547. Again, he's saying that God had sex with Mary. Here's another one. Jesus is the literal spirit brother of Lucifer, a creation. That's from Gospel Through the Ages, page 15. Here's basic Jehovah's Witnesses. Here's my first one. Jehovah's first creation was his only begotten Son. He was used by Jehovah in creating all other things. That's in a book called Aid to Bible Understanding, pages 390 through 391. Then it says, here's another one. Jesus was Michael, the archangel, who became a man. That's from the Watchtower, May 15th, 1963, page 307, The New World 284, page 284. Here's another one. Jesus was only a perfect man, not God in the flesh. Jesus was only a perfect man, not God in the flesh. Comes from Reasoning from the Scriptures, 1985, page 306. Here's another one. Jesus did not rise from the dead in his physical body. That's from Awake, July 22nd, 1973, page 4. Here's another one. Jesus was raised not a human creature, but a spirit. That's from Let God Be True, page 276. And yet another one. Jesus was born again. Jesus was born again. The Watchtower, November 15th, 1954, page 682. Here's another one. Jesus did not die on a cross, but on a stake. Reasoning from the Scriptures, 1985, pages 89 and 90. Here's another one. Jesus began his invisible rule over the earth in 1914. Jesus began his invisible rule over the earth in 1914. The Truth Shall Make You Free is the name of the work, and it's on page 300. Here's another one. Jesus' ransom sacrifice did not include Adam. Let God Be True, page 119. The only 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses will go to heaven. That's from Reasoning from the Scriptures, 1985, pages 166 through 167. It's also on page 361, Let God Be True, page 121. So they said this a lot. Here's another one. Only the 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses are born again. That's from Reasoning from the Scriptures, 1985, page 76. It's also found in Watchtower, 11-15-54, page 681. Here's another one. Only the 144,000 may take communion. How do you know who they are? I'm sure they're the ones that pay the most tithe. Anyway, here's another one. Blood transfusions are a sin. From Reasoning from the Scriptures, 1985, pages 72 and 73. Here's another one. They also refuse to vote, salute the flag, sing the Star-Spangled Banner, or celebrate Christmas or birthdays. They are not allowed to serve in the armed forces. Here's another one. Satan was entrusted with the obligation and charged with the duty of overseeing the creation of the earth. Did you hear what I just read? Satan was entrusted with the obligation and charged with the duty of overseeing the creation of the earth. It's from a book called Children. It's page 55. Here's the basic beliefs of the Gnostics. Yahweh was a lesser god. They call him a demiurge. They called him an evil god. The real God sent his spirit, they say, which possessed Yeshua or Jesus on the day he was baptized, giving him the ability to do miracles. And that spirit of that real God left him just before he died on the cross. They believe that Yahweh created all evil and made all evil persons and they made all of the evil persons in the biblical text out to be the heroes and their victims to be the villains. Sounds like what the Democrats do today. Just saying. They also flip scripture around to say the opposite. In other words, they say Jesus came to destroy the law and the prophets. They believe that the body was evil and the spirit was trapped inside it, and only by special knowledge could the soul be released from his body and reunited with the real God. So the body is bad, therefore it is not my fault. In other words, the devil made me do it. Your body's bad. Your soul is trapped inside it, and your soul is just horrified by all this evil that your body does, and it can't control it. That's the nonsensical stuff that the Gnostics taught. They believed that Yeshua, that Jesus, was a man born naturally of Joseph and Mary. Most of the doctrines I read from the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses come right out of the Gnostic Gospels. Some were tweaked a little bit. Most were simply adopted. They were not new revelations given to them by some angel. They weren't new at all. They were new to the people around them because the people around them didn't read the Gnostic Gospels. The divorce rate is just as high in the church as it is outside the church. Oh no, it's not even true. Now it's gotten to the point where you are more likely to get a divorce if you're a Christian than if you're not. In the church, domestic violence is just as high among Christians as non-believers. Depression, loneliness, sadness, bitterness, anger, anxiety, hopelessness, and helplessness is just as high in the church as it is outside. Are all just as said that? Why is this the case? Well, it's because from the beginning, the church rejected all things Jewish, which was to reject all things biblical. The church opened its doors wide to people who taught things other than what the apostles taught. In fact, the church allowed men like that to take over their leadership. Wicked people's lives are noisy, full of commotion and turmoil. Evil deeds, false doctrine is what the evil deeds are being spoken of here. The didache, remember, it's doctrine. So the evil deeds are the false doctrine. That leads to lives full of noise, commotion, and turmoil. Wicked people break others down with crushing blows, physically and emotionally. They say things like, he's a liar, he's a liar, he's a liar. Don't listen to him. His TV show, nobody watches it. His radio show, nobody listens to it. He's a loser. He's a weakling. I'm just saying. They break down others with crushing blows, physically and emotionally. They are full of rage and distort their faces in anger. Evil deeds, false doctrines, they break down people with crushing blows, emotional and spiritual. They've even led to physical violence, such as gathering Jewish men, women, and children together during the Dark Ages, forcing them into their synagogues and burning them all to death while the Christians marched around the flames singing, Christ, we adore thee, which, by the way, can still be found in modern hymnals and are sung by churches to this very day. Wicked people are the opposite of the righteous. They are not just. They don't speak what is true. Evil deeds, the false doctrine, leads to unrighteousness, injustice, and lies. Evil people are not just towards men. Evil deeds, the false doctrine, leads to injustice toward men. Evil people are not obedient to the laws of God. Hence, evil people are not honest. They are not virtuous. They are not pious. They are certainly not Torah observant. Evil deeds, the false doctrines, lead to a complete rejection of God's law. Hence, evil deeds, false doctrines, lead away from honesty, virtue, and piety. There is no peace in the hearts of those who are filled with evil deeds, filled with false doctrine. There is no peace in their homes. They are constantly tossed like an ocean. Those who teach anything other than what was taught by the apostles are not to be let into our abode, our homes, our hearts, our minds. We are not to take after their welfare, not to ask after their welfare, We are not to bid them peace. We are not to borrow money from them. We are not to be friends with them. We are not to take counsel from them. We do not, if we do, we become guilty of their evil deeds. Why? Because we become a part of it and it becomes a part of us. Christians, Muslims, Gnostics, Mormons, and Jehovah's Witnesses do not worship the God of the Yehudim, the God of the Jews. They do not worship Yahweh. Most of the major doctrines of the church today are the exact opposite of the teachings of the apostles. These doctrines were introduced by Gnostic and pagan idol worshippers. The Bible says, study to show yourself approved to God. Some like to quote one part of a verse which says, let no man teach you. That's just one little part of the verse. But if no man is to teach you, what is the job of the pastor, evangelist, apostle, prophet, preacher, or teacher? It doesn't make any sense when you stop and think about it. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 16 tells us that those who are without rabbinic training, yes, folks, the Greek word is amathos, and that word means those who are without rabbinic training. It even says so in Strong's Concordance, if you want to look it up. Peter goes on to say that these untrained men and women translate all of the letters, all of the epistolae written by Shaul, by Paul, and all of the Tanakh, all of the Old Testament as it's called, all of the Graphe, the writings, to their own destruction, which is separation from the truth. That's what the Jews meant by destruction. Men who call themselves rabbis are not always properly trained. In fact, I would go as far as to say most of them are not. The emphasis is on Jewish ritual and custom instead of proper translation and application as it was in the time of the apostles. A path that leads to truth is humility, justice, righteousness, love, tenderness, and piety. Seek out the teachings of the Jewish apostles who wrote the Sepharim Shelahim, the New Testament letters, and you will find Torah-observant Judaism. God has never changed. His word has never changed. His law has never changed. Yeshua came to reconcile the Yehudit, the Jewish people, to simple Torah observance. And since he did, Goim, or Gentiles, can convert to Judaism and be grafted into it and find salvation. It's time to separate ourselves from the doctrine of the evil and follow after the doctrine of the Torah observant apostles. Shalom, shalom.